Also recognises that vertigo, dizziness, balance problems, hearing loss, tinnitus are a number of common symptoms of Meniere's, which leads to sudden, debilitating attacks that can cause a loss of employment, social isolation, a loss of confidence, particularly for people concerned that the condition limits their mobility and capacity to get out of the home, and also impacts on their personal capabilities of living an active and independent everyday life. The motion also recognises the exact number of people that live with the vestibular disorders, particularly Meniere's, is not well known, and that the conditions are underdiagnosed and underreported. And it touches on some research from the United States that indicates up to 5% of the population may be living with one or more vestibular conditions, which in our case would translate to around 1 million Australians. The motion also points out the simple and I hope obvious fact to the Parliament that Meniere's Australia support groups could do a whole lot more with a bit of additional support in terms of the counselling they provide, the practical advice that they offer to families and those suffering with vestibular conditions. The information and peer support network could extend further, and for those that are listening, particularly philanthropic organisations or even those operating in the hearing loss area, some support for Meniere's Australia would be a terrific measure. Meniere's disease is a condition in which there is excess fluid in the inner ear. The excess fluid disturbs the ear's balance and hearing mechanisms and produces a range of symptoms, some of which I've touched on earlier. It's quite a frightening condition in that the attacks usually centre around vertigo, and as I had the misfortune of an inner ear infection a few months ago, Meniere's Australia's representatives reminded me that I had a first-hand sense of what many of their members were experiencing quite regularly, but it's very disturbing when one's mobility is completely compromised and you're not even sure whether you can lie still in bed with any great grace. So you can imagine people that suffer from this condition and these quite debilitating symptoms regularly, and what an enormous impact it must have on their quality of life. The attacks of vertigo usually occur in clusters with varying periods of remission. It might be a matter of days or some years between attacks. The attacks can occur without warning, and you can't predict how severe the vertigo will be or how long it will last. Tinnitus, distorted hearing and pressure in the ear, a feeling of fullness in the ear due to the fluid build-up, often occur in conjunction with vertigo. In the early stages of the condition, hearing returns to normal levels following an attack, but the disease progresses measurably and permanent hearing loss occurs. Estimates vary. Around 90% of people with Meniere's have the disease in only one ear when first diagnosed. Around 50% of these may go on to develop the disease in both ears. Now, according to the ABS Population Health Survey in 2005, Meniere's disease affects 1 in every 600 Australians. It appears that Meniere's is diagnosed, if it's diagnosed at all, around the late 30s to early 50s, and it's uncommon for children to be diagnosed with the condition. Unfortunately, this period, this window in people's lives when diagnosis is most likely to occur, coincides with some of the busiest times in their lives in terms of careers and families. There's no known medical cure for Meniere's. The condition can be managed to some degree through medication, diet, stress reduction, exercise programs, natural therapies, and as a last resort, perhaps surgery. And this is where Meniere's Australia's work becomes so important in providing information to sufferers and their families about how to manage a condition and how to sustain the best quality of life and best engagement in their community and with their work and families, mindful that there is no medical cure for the condition. There are treatment options for acute attacks of vertigo, as well as options for managing the symptoms that are experienced, and possibly some steps that might reduce the severity and frequency of further attacks. Although it's not life-threatening, the disease can be life-destroying. There's a great deal of fear and uncertainty which may accompany the symptoms, and a sufferer may appear perfectly well and then be unable to stand up straight, unable to hear properly, or be coping with severe and uncontrollable ringing or roaring noises in their ears. This can result in enormous problems for their employment, the resulting financial hardships and difficulty with families and friends. So whilst the condition may be able to be alleviated and managed, it is sadly normally a progressive condition that's irreversible. And as I said, the causes as well as treatments remain unknown. But the anxiety that it provokes can be extraordinarily debilitating and create of itself an own sense of stress, suffering and helplessness. And this is why organisations like Meniere Australia are so crucial to steer sufferers and their families through what can be an extraordinarily horrendous time for them and a time of enormous adjustment. Meniere's disease actually falls between the cracks in the current healthcare system. Sensory hearing loss is identified as one of the worst consequences of Meniere's disease. And I was happy to be talking with the Australian Hearing Service, which has a terrific outlet located in my electorate in Frankston, just talking about the overlap between the treatments and services they provide and conditions such as Meniere's, which might not immediately appear to be a hearing condition, but that's where some of the most profound symptoms arise. However, there is a chronic illness component with the vertigo attacks and the vestibular impairment that's not addressed well by these current health system arrangements. So when we looked at a 2007 report known as Listen Here, the Economic Impact and Cost of Hearing Loss in Australia, the economic consequences through lost productivity and direct cost was enormous. About $6.7 million a year lost to the Australian economy because of hearing loss conditions, and Meniere's is very much a part of that. It's well documented that the real cost might be as high as $11.75 billion, which in 2007 was 1.4% of GDP, according to research by Access Economics. So this is an enormously significant impact in individuals' lives and their families, but its consequence for the nation, in my view, warrants it getting greater attention in our health strategies. We need to know how many people actually have this condition. That is the first impediment to tackling it, in not knowing what the incidence and prevalence of different conditions around Meniere's and the hearing loss that results actually is. I mentioned that 2005 survey, 1 in 600 or 606, as the case may be, is what the ABS puts it at. But there are potential data collection points right throughout the health system when patients present with symptoms of hearing loss, vertigo and tinnitus at ear, nose and throat and neurologist clinics and hospitals across Australia. Some effort at capturing that would help to inform policymakers about what the best thing is that we can do. While all this is going on and there's a lack of coordinated effort in terms of the health system generally, the Meniere Support Group and Meniere Australia are simply getting on with the work. In their own survey of their members in 2006, they captured this spread of diagnostic age between 30 and 50, and that 54% of those that were members were diagnosed while they were still actively in the workforce. So you can see that economic consequence. 21% of the members reported they had to take paid leave because of their Meniere's condition, and 16% said they'd reduced working hours. So tonight's motion is to add strength to the arm of Meniere's Australia. I am a little bit parochial. Its Information and Resource Centre happens to be located in Dunkley at very modest offices as they look to use new technology to share their learnings about how to cope with the condition and maintain a quality of life. Natasha Harrington-Benton's the director of Meniere's UK, and she was in our country recently to present both in Melbourne and Sydney with Professor Steve O'Leary and Professor Bill Gibson, hoping to internationalise the work and the insights to make sure there's more peer support and resources available. Neither of the group here in Australia or the UK gets government funding, but it's a bit of a shout out to the philanthropic community to get behind Meniere's Australia. I also want to tip my hat to John Cook and the very dedicated team at the Resource Centre, and also Lynn Paulson, OAM, her work for Meniere's Australia, and John is to be commended.
The time has expired. The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Shortland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's with great pleasure that I rise to speak on this motion, and I congratulate the member for bringing it before the House. Meniere's disease is one of those diseases that people know very little about, and it is one of those diseases that can actually take a person's life away from them. I thought I'd dedicate the first part of my speech to just talking a little bit about what Meniere's disease is. And there's the classic symptoms of vertigo, dizziness, alliance problems, hearing loss, tinnitus, and they're all very common features of Meniere's disease, leading to these sudden debilitating attacks where people really can't function. And it also leads to loss of employment, social isolation, loss of confidence, personal capabilities in everyday life. Now, I know a number of, I actually have acquaintances of 3 people that have suffered from Meniere's disease, and they've had all the symptoms, and it's the vertigo, the nausea and vomiting, and people don't realise just how bad that can be. People cannot lift their head off the pillow because their Meniere's disease is just so bad. And the vertigo, the dizziness, the fluctuating hearing loss, the tinnitus, the feeling of pressure or fullness in the ear, and it's all the excess fluid and it's disturbing the balance and the hearing mechanism, and it produces all these symptoms. And when you're suffering from those symptoms, and when you can have a severe attack at any moment, it's really debilitating. And it often takes a while to work out and to diagnose that a person's actually suffering from Meniere's disease. And one person that I saw having a very severe attack looked like they were having a seizure. It had exactly the same sort of symptoms. The person had lost control of their body, they were unable to function, but it was Meniere's disease that this person has. And in the earlier stages, it's really hard to predict how often a person will have an attack, and hard to diagnose, and the periods of remission, they change from time to time, and they'll lessen, they'll disappear, and then they'll return. And I've been told that the vertigo creates a sensation of spinning. The whole room you're in starts spinning around you. It can last for 10 hours to 10 minutes to several hours. The same woman that I mentioned that when I first saw her have an attack with her Meniere's, she rarely leaves the house now, I might say. Her life has totally been taken from her. If she doesn't drive, she's reliant on her partner for the basic sort of support within her house. If she and talking about the room spinning, if she has an attack, she manages to get to the wall of the room and then walk along the wall to be able to gain some sort of stability. And it's a horrible feeling, and that the nausea, the seasickness, the dizziness, and the feeling that you're going to fall, and that's security of the wall. And it's terrible. It can even lead to loss of bowel control and just your basic functions. You lose control of your basic functions, and the fact that you can't predict when you're going to have an attack is also really important and debilitating, and a side effect of being a sufferer of Meniere's. The unsteadiness when you're moving rapidly, and that can be even when you're not having an attack. Then the tinnitus and the distortion of hearing. One of my staff members, his brother-in-law suffers from Meniere's disease, and he told me that he described it to him as if somebody's kneading his brain, and that's the feeling that it has. And he was a person that was in a very responsible job, and he had to give up work, and he's now unemployed. So it is I don't think that we can emphasise enough the debilitating effect of it. The fact that Meniere's disease is one of those silent diseases that not many people are aware of, and that it is one of those, and the debilitating nature of it. Now, in my research, I found that Meniere's disease has 3 stages. Stage 1 is when the vertigo is a form where you get dizzy and the spinniness, and by the time you present for your diagnostic test, you have returned to normal, and that leads to that culminates in it being very difficult to diagnose the person that I was talking about, that the woman that's so debilitated by it. It took a very long time before they could diagnose it, what was actually the problem. And half the people who are affected with it at this stage will, obviously go into remission. Stage 2 is where it's easier to diagnose Meniere's disease. The attacks of vertigo continue, the tinnitus increases, the feeling of pressure or fullness in the air may worsen, and hearing fluctuates, but never quite returns to normal levels, so it's always there. And the important fact is it's a chronic disease, it's a lifelong disease, it's a very debilitating disease, and there is absolutely no cure for it. And it's commonly found in adults that are in their 30s or older, and the member mentioned that 30 to 50, and that would probably be the age group that I think that it's mostly found in, and I'm sure he's well researched as well. And it really causes underlying psychological problems. People lose their confidence, their self-esteem, their independence. Now, the other part of the motion I'd like to turn to now is the Meniere's Australia and the work that they do. Support groups in our society, be it Meniere's, be it the post-polio support group that I'm closely involved in, the asthma support, the Heart Foundation support groups, all those support groups really do a marvellous job. Meniere's Australia, it's a not-for-profit, non-government organisation which promotes the development of Australia-wide services and supports people that are living with Meniere's disease. Meniere's Australia was formed by the Meniere's support groups of New South Wales and Victoria, and I know the member has already shared with us about the office being in his electorate, and it's affiliated with the Meniere's Research Fund, which is administered through Sydney University Medical Foundation. The mission of the Meniere's Research Fund is to raise funding to support research into Meniere's disease and to finance the expansion of the Meniere's Disease Research Laboratory. The fund currently holds $1.5 million, and it's been sourced from donations, commonly community fundraising, funding grants, and has a target of raising $2.5 million, with $2.5 million just be scratching the surface. The government does recognise, I've been advised, the importance, the minister's told me that she recognises the importance of Meniere's Australia, and she knows that their work actually helps people along, gives them the support they need when they're suffering from Meniere's disease. All these support groups, and Meniere's Australia is no different, needs to have the work that they do acknowledged, and I know that sufferers of Meniere's disease rely on groups such as rely on Meniere's Australia. I congratulate them on the fine work they do, and I think that research into this disease is well and truly needed.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to second the motion by my good friend, the very handsome member for Dunkley. And I welcome the opportunity to discuss an issue that is of importance to many families across our nation and to participate in this debate in both expanding our Parliament's knowledge and the knowledge of those listening in at home on a disease that affects approximately 1 in 600 Australians. Meniere's disease is a disorder of the inner ear, associated with a change in the volume of fluid inside a portion of the inner ear called the labyrinth. It causes episodes of vertigo, tinnitus, which is a constant buzzing or humming noise in one's ear, a feeling of fullness or pressure in the ear, and fluctuating, progressive, slow-frequency hearing loss. Meniere's disease was first named after a French physician, Prosper Meniere, who first identified the cause of the disorder back in 1861. It's a disease that can develop at any age, but is more likely to happen in adults aged between 40 and 60 years of age. Also, there is no definitive test for Meniere's. It's only diagnosed when all other causes have been ruled out. Now, a diagnosis of Meniere's disease is not promising. Although Meniere's won't directly kill you, it is likely to make your life miserable in a way that fewer diseases can. For a Meniere's episode generally involves severe vertigo, imbalance, nausea, and vomiting, with the average attack lasting for 2 to 4 hours. After a severe attack, most people find that they're extremely exhausted and then need to sleep for several hours. It's a condition that affects people differently. It can range from the intensity of being a mild annoyance to a chronic lifelong disability. And it's important, Madam Deputy Speaker, to appreciate how devastating such symptoms can be and the natural deterioration and progression that it can have on individuals suffering of the disease. As for those who have experienced, they describe it as frustrating, disabling, and disheartening. Something they say that you could only wish upon your worst enemies. And Madam Deputy Speaker, there is currently no known medical cure for Meniere's. However, the condition can be managed to some extent through medication, diet, stress reduction, exercise programs, natural therapies, and on the last resort, surgery. It is a progressive disease which worsens more slowly in some and more quickly in others. Some patients experience periods of remission for no apparent reason, and some remissions may continue for many years, even decades, while other remissions are sadly short-lived. And although the attacks of vertigo may decline with time, the hearing loss and tinnitus generally persist. Madam Deputy Speaker, many people suffering with Meniere's disease lead productive, near normal lives, while others suffer great challenges in coping. I can only think of a few situations more stressful and draining on one's mental condition than the combination of a droning side and a ringing noise inside your inner ear, and not knowing when you'll lose control of your body, suffering an attack of vertigo, nausea, and vomiting. So it's no surprise that those suffering this disease, in many severe cases, may end up losing their jobs and will spend their lives on disability. However, thankfully, Madam Deputy Speaker, the statistics show that the majority, perhaps between 60 and 80% of sufferers, will not need a permanent disability and will recover without medical treatment. Now, there are many theories about what happens or what causes Meniere's disease, but there are no definite answers available. Some researchers think that Meniere's disease is a result of constriction of the blood vessels, similar to those in migraine headaches, and others think it is brought on by allergies. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this demonstrates the importance of medical research. And that's why at this motion it's important to recognise, as this motion does, of the great work being done by the broader community to provide awareness, to provide much needed counselling, practical advice and information to both peer groups and individuals and families and their carers. But ultimately, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's medical research that has the potential to ease the pain, suffering and hardship of those suffered by Meniere's disease. That is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, in this place we need to declare a war on waste and inefficiency. We need to declare a war on those that seek to divert our scarce and precious resources into inefficient means of production. For it's this waste and inefficiency that we've seen has an opportunity cost. And one of those opportunity costs is the reduction on spending on medical research to reduce the pain, suffering and hardship of those affected by diseases such as Meniere's.
I call the member for Blair.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
for some people, the Alfred Hitchcock, favourite Hitchcock movie is Rear Window, but mine is Vertigo. And the reason it's because I'm a James Stewart fan for a start and thought that Kim Novak was pretty hot. But one of the things that we would say today about the character played by James Stewart, Scotty, if I remember rightly, who's a former police detective who become private eye, who suffers from vertigo, we'd probably say he had Meniere's disease. We know a lot more about it these days than they did in 1954 when the novel was actually written, and the movie was actually produced and filmed in 1958. The medical science has really developed a lot since that time, and there's been much development in this area. But sadly, if anyone's interested in having a look at how that character is affected in such a graphic way, and showing all the symptoms of Meniere's disease, the vertigo, the dizziness, the nausea, all of those symptoms that you can see in the Jimmy Stewart character is displayed clearly there. And I think that the novelist clearly was describing someone who really had Meniere's disease, and Alfred Hitchcock does a terrific job in the way he does it. Now, the government has provided advice in terms of the competitive funding rounds, research-based, including the Hearing Loss Prevention Program, and the National Health and Medical Research Council medical research grants, but there's a lot more to be done. We have provided assistance and advice to the Office of Hearing Services with information about what steps can be undertaken, the funding sources that can be sought from state and territory governments as well as some private sources. But this is a chronic incurable condition of the inner ear, and it produces a range of debilitating side effects. Ergo, Scotty in vertigo. And it can affect hearing and balance to a varying degree. And there's different stages, remember, for short and said. It's characterised by that period of vertigo, and all of us who've played sport and had a hard knock or felt unwell would have experienced vertigo in our lives. But you can imagine the debilitating aspects of having it on a daily basis. The low-pitched tinnitus. Now, my wife's had tinnitus for quite some time, and I know how it's impacted on her, but the hearing loss as well. So this is a terrible condition which affects people differently, but all the symptoms that previous speakers have talked about really go towards showing the impact it can have on people's lives, from mild annoyance to really chronic, lifelong disability. And I'm sure there are many people with Meniere's disease, and amongst the 800,000 people we see on disability support pension in this country. Sadly, it is not diagnosed as freely and effectively as it should be. Now, Meniere's Australia is a not-for-profit organisation, and like so many we see in our electorates and across the states and territories of Australia, who do great work in advising and informing people of this, assisting people to understand and appreciate what these people suffer from. And many years ago, there would have been tremendous misunderstanding of people who had this. People would have been accused of faking it. People would have accused of saying, what's wrong with you? But this is a real condition that affects a lot. So Meniere's Australia provide for health professionals and individuals who experience these problems, also seek funding opportunities, also provide information and resources to doctors and allied health professionals who deal with people who sadly suffer from this condition. One of the most constructive things a person can do if diagnosed is to learn as much as possible. So these support groups are extremely valuable sources of information. And I would urge anyone who is in my electorate who suffers from these conditions to actually seek medical advice. This disease affects about 190 people per 100,000. Now, recent gender studies from my research into this area indicate that women are more likely to suffer from this condition than men. There's no definitive test for Meniere's disease. It can only be really diagnosed when all other things are excluded. I was talking to a physician recently in my electorate in relation to another disease, Dr. David Careless, and he was telling me there are many diseases that are like this, that you can only, after you do all the tests, work out that this is what they've got. And he said it's his sorry duty on many occasions to tell the patient, well, you've really got chronic fatigue, or you've really got some other condition that really is a fibromyalgia or something that's really affecting you. It's only then they understand So information is critical. So there's things they can do, environmental changes, dietary changes, exercise, but none of it solves the problem. So there's a lot more we can do to ease the stress and anxiety, and I commend Member for Bunkley for this motion and commend Meniere Australia for the work they do in helping people across the country.
Thank you. The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Acting Madam Deputy Speaker. 1 in 6 Australian people has a hearing loss, and with the ageing of our population, hearing loss is projected to increase to 1 in 4 by the year 2050. Hearing loss can result if there is a problem at any point in the hearing pathway, in the outer, middle or inner ears, or in the complex auditory nerve pathway to the brain. Many people who experience hearing loss can feel isolated and frustrated. However, there can be a lot of different avenues someone with regular hearing loss, such as congenital hearing loss which has been present since birth, or acquired hearing loss which occurs later on, that it can take. Yet there is a disease known as Meniere's disease which can see sufferers slip through the cracks of the healthcare system and not receive the treatment they so desperately need or deserve. Meniere's disease is a debilitating progressive condition of the inner ear, or put simply, it's a condition in which there is an excess of fluid in the inner ear. People who suffer from Meniere's disease can produce symptoms such as vertigo, a form of dizziness where your surroundings appear to spin, tinnitus, an abnormal ringing noise inside the ear, fluctuating hearing loss, or a feeling of pressure or fullness in the ear due to a fluid build-up. There's a great deal of fear and uncertainty which can accompany these symptoms. A sufferer may appear well, but may be unable to stand up straight, unable to hear properly, or be coping with severe and uncontrollable ringing, humming or roaring noises. These types of issues associated with the disease can make a person feel isolated, frustrated, embarrassed and even difficult to cope with. There are different estimates of the number of Australians with Meniere's disease. According to research from the United States of America, up to 5% of the population in that country may be living with one or more vestibular conditions such as Meniere's disease. Hearing Australia's best estimates are that there are 40,000 Australians with Meniere's disease, with annual new cases of about 4,000. According to Meniere's Australia, a not-for-profit organisation, hearing loss with Meniere's can fluctuate according to the stage of the disease. Dietary and lifestyle changes are important in managing the personal impact of Meniere's disease. There is increasing evidence further loss of hearing can be prevented by receiving the right information, and so there needs to be a greater understanding by health professionals so they can quickly diagnose a problem, and they need to work with individuals in the mental health sector as issues within the inner ear can cause stress, anxiety and depression. One of the biggest issues with Meniere's is that it can go undiagnosed, and so anybody with those sorts of symptoms that I mentioned earlier and other speakers also mentioned should seek the necessary medical help and service. Many sufferers of Meniere's and other vestibular disorders can experience social isolation of loss of confidence, which can result in problems with their employment, their relationships, and it catapults them into possible financial hardships and, as I say, difficulties within their families and their personal lives. According to Listen Here, the economic impact and cost of hearing loss in Australia, published in 2007, identified productivity loss related directly to hearing impairment accounts for more than half of the total financial costs, or some $6.7 billion a year. It is well documented that hearing loss represents a real financial cost to Australia of $11.75 billion per annum, or 1.4% of gross domestic product, according to the research study by Access Economics. Meniere's Australia was unable to identify any particular support groups within the Riverina electorate. However, a spokeswoman from MA did say that one of the biggest issues they have with getting support for Meniere's sufferers in having someone well enough with to hold the forums or support groups. Many sufferers of Meniere's find out about their condition after it is too late to turn back, and once their vertigo or tinnitus has reached the extreme that many feel they are no longer capable to function. It's one of the reasons Meniere's Australia was established. In 2007 it was registered with the objective of working to improve the diagnosis, treatment and managing of this debilitating disease. There is unfortunately no treatment for Meniere's, but many things can be done to assist sufferers in the early stages. One of Meniere's Australia's biggest challenges is making the community more aware of the issue. As with more support, Meniere's Australia's support groups would be able to provide much needed counselling, practical advice, information and peer support to both individuals their families and their carers. I commend the member for Dunkley for bringing this important private members' business for discussion in the Parliament. This debate helps to raise awareness about Meniere and the umbrella group which is doing important work to combat the disease. It shows the member for Dunkley's care and concern for this little-known condition, and as I commend it, and I commend the motion to the House. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Thank you, Member. The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Crosby.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Although the disease which we discussed today was first discovered by a French physician, Prosper Meniere, in 1861, I dare say it's been discussed and the name has been used in this chamber more in the last 30 minutes than it has been in the last 30 years. I follow the honourable member in thanking the member for Dunkley for bringing this important issue before the chamber so that we can discuss it and hopefully add to the sum of understanding about a condition which is probably more prevalent in the Australian community than many might think. Around about 40,000 Australians are thought to suffer from some degree of Meniere's disease. Most people won't have heard of it until they have a family member or a friend who is affected. No doubt there are people working in this building who are affected by it. Even people who are listening or reading this after today's debate in the handset. I know of constituents who suffer from Meniere's disease because I've had contact from them directly. Indeed, I have a staff member who suffers from the disease, and I've watched how it has from time to time debilitated her and severely impacted on her enjoyment of life and capacity to work over the time that I've known her. It seems that those who have this syndrome appear to be affected in vastly different ways. It has been mentioned already, it's a syndrome in which excess fluids disturb the balance of the inner ear and hearing mechanisms and produce a range of symptoms. Some of these symptoms include vertigo, tinnitus, fluctuating hear loss and a feeling of pressure or fullness, like your ear is full of water, sometimes the feeling you get after having had a swim in a swimming pool. Experience in these symptoms can be debilitating, demoralising and very distressing. For those with Meniere's, the random onset of these symptoms is extremely frustrating. 1 minute you're fine, functioning normally, and the next minute you're suffering from vertigo where you lose all sense of balance and are kept virtually immobile. As to move even slightly causes the room around you to spin, causing a disturbing sense of disorientation. Vertigo attacks like this can last for hours and sometimes days, and can even be accompanied by vomiting as your body responds to the lack of balance. For those witnessing attacks of vertigo, it can be hard to understand what's actually happening to the person in front of them. The symptoms are hard to understand and explain, even from those who are suffering them. The words, "I'm sorry, I feel dizzy now and have to lie down," can interrupt a business meeting, running daily errands or social outings. And because the symptoms are so broad and non-specific, Meniere is often misdiagnosed. The relatively low profile of Meniere's means that it can be hard to get the correct diagnosis or treatment. It has 3 stages where stage 1 is the lowest impact and stage 3 is the worst. Some sufferers don't progress beyond stage 1, where the symptoms pass more quickly and where people can stay in remission for months and sometimes even years. They, Deputy Speaker, are the lucky ones. For people on stage 1, managing the triggers for Meniere's is all important. Dietary changes can lessen the long-term effects of Meniere's disease. For example, because Meniere's is caused by the excess of fluid in the inner ear, for many reducing the salt intake can lessen the symptoms of the disease. That's hard because salt's prevalent in just about everything we eat. For those in stage 3, Meniere's is almost completely debilitating. In stage 3, Meniere's will force drastic changes to how life is lived every day. Some people are no longer to go out of the home unaccompanied. They have to give up driving or independence, and for some people whose Meniere's is triggered by bright lights, they can't even enter a shopping centre or a supermarket. I have a constituent in my electorate who has stage 3 Meniere's, and managing the disease completely dominates her life. Her frequent incapacity affects relationships with family and friends and caused her to abandon her employment. She's been jeered at as she staggered home along the road trying to get a safe resting place by passers-by who mistakenly thought that she was drunk. Its unfortunate consequences of public awareness of the health issue being very low. Meniere's is a difficult and challenging syndrome, and once again, I thank the member for Dunley for raising it in the House.
Has expired. Thank you. And I thank all the members who participated in that debate for the information. It was very informative and certainly a lot of support extended to sufferers of Meniere's disease. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next meeting.
Government business, order of the day number 1, grievance debate.
The question is that grievance has been noted. I call the member for London.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I also praise the member for Dunkley for that excellent motion that he put forward. He's a very good man, the member for Dunkley, and a Richmond supporter to boot as well. So it was a very, very good motion, and I must commend all members for the way they spoke to the motion as well. They did so extremely well. Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise tonight to talk about an event which is going to occur on Thursday. Thursday this year is Are You OK Day? And it is a significant day and a day which is growing in importance year in, year out. Are You OK Day was started by Gavin Larkin in 2009. He started it because in 1995 his father Barry died, and he died when he took his own life. Now, I must commend Gavin for having the courage to start Are You OK Day in 2009, and I would call on all members to get behind this day because it addresses an issue which is a scourge upon this nation, and one which sadly seems to be growing rather than diminishing.